Hello everyone, welcome to the Farsights Spotlight. And this is a really great one. This is the first Spotlight for May 2025. Time really flies. I want to apologize a little bit for the audience on farsightprime.com as well as YouTube for the sunglasses. I'm not trying to be like James Bond. It's just that I have eye sensitivity right now and I'm facing a lot of very bright lights. So I have to have the sunglasses to make it okay for me right now. I don't expect to be wearing them in a week, but for just right now, I have to wear them. Okay, so this is a really interesting spotlight because this is going to give me a time that I can explain how remote viewing stuff is actually utilized, because it's never ever utilized. Well, it is by other people, but not by us. It's never utilized in the absence of other means of information gathering. So what I want to go through is looking at some of the information that we see in the news that is telling us, that is informing us on how the United States is likely going to be proceeding, and then to compare that with some of the remote viewing stuff that we have. But you want to remember that, at least as far as Farsight is, you don't take any stuff that we give you in absence of everything else. You look at it and then you fit it in with the larger picture. And that's how military intelligence gathering actually uses remote viewing. They look at what the remote viewing says and they never take it by itself. They combine it with everything else that they get in normal means of information gathering, and then they come up with whatever they come up with. So the future of the United States, a short-term future, so we're talking 2025 and 2026. So let's start with the economic stuff. Now, the economic stuff and the political stuff is very closely intertwined. So I do not want to tell you that this is my prediction, this is what you should believe, this is what Courtney Brown and Farsight said. No. I want to give you the reasoning for why we are saying these predictions, why we are saying these thoughts, so that you can then decide whether it's garbage or whether you want to make up your own mind and say, hey, this is actually really interesting. Maybe it's really going to work this way. So I want to actually tell you how we use our regular pieces of information to come up with these conclusions, and then you decide, all right? So there's going to be economic and political stuff, and they're going to be intertwined. Now, I have my notes here so I can make sure I don't forget anything. This is how I see how the economy is going to be working out. Now, in my opinion, and I'm going to give you the reasons for this, is the U.S. It is not possible to avoid a very serious economic crash. So in the previous administration, during the Biden-Harris administration, their main approach would have been to try to avoid an economic crash as much as possible, as far as could be. But it would have been impossible to avoid it anyway. So in terms of what's happening now with the Donald Trump administration, I see them, the way I see it is they fully embrace the idea that a crash is absolutely inevitable, and I'm going to give you the reasons for it. So let's start with the debt. The debt, and by the way, everything I give you in terms of numbers, just Google it. Just find out for yourself if I'm telling you the truth. The debt is approximately $37 trillion, and it's growing exponentially. Now, the interest on the debt is what you really have to focus on. The interest on the debt, and again, check it for yourself. Just use ChatGPT or Google or Grok, or they'll tell you the same thing. It's approximately, the interest on that debt is approximately $1 trillion, and that's per year. So that's $1 trillion per year, and it is growing exponentially. Now, the interest is greater than the entire spending for U.S. defense spending in the United States per year. So the interest is it's the biggest gorilla on the block. It's huge. And it is absolutely impossible to tax the American taxpayers or to use taxes in any way, shape, or form enough to get out of that debt because of the interest, because of the $1 trillion of interest that's being added every single year and is growing. So it's a train wreck, and it's impossible to avoid that train wreck. You can't tax people. It's just impossible. It's not like you could hunker down and tax everybody and pay everything off. It's just impossible. You cannot tax this country enough to pay off the debt when the interest rate is growing at a rate of $1 trillion per year. So there's only one solution that I see. And the only way forward is to completely eliminate the entire interest payment all at once. That's the only way that can be done. The only way forward, if you have now the deficit, the U.S. deficit is approximately $2 trillion. So the interest on the debt is 1/2 of the entire yearly deficit. So you have to get rid of the interest rate, the interest payments in order to attack anything dealing with the deficit. Now people have been saying, okay, look at DOGE. DOGE is like maybe going to save $200 or $300 billion a year. Like, how is that going to help when we have a deficit of $2 trillion? Well, you're right. DOGE with only $200 or $300 billion savings a year is not going to solve any problem with a debt interest rate of or interest payment that's $1 trillion a year. And if the deficit is $2 trillion, so what is $300 billion when you have a deficit of $2 trillion? However, if half of the entire deficit is wiped out completely in a blink of an eye, and you go from $2 trillion per year down to $1 trillion per year, then $300 billion saved from that is a lot. And you can get other savings with defense spending or other savings through other means. But once you have the deficit down to under $1 trillion, then you're within managing ballpark range of fiddling with things to fix the rest of it. So, but you know, the interest rate has to be eliminated. The interest payment, the yearly interest payment has to be eliminated for anything to go forward, or the train wreck's going to happen no matter what. But the train wreck of just letting everything continue the way it is going, versus the train wreck of, you know, embracing it and then letting it happen and using it for something positive. So how do you get rid of the entire interest payment all at once? That's a big thing. That's $1 trillion a year. Now the first thing that can be done, which is the worst thing, that's not going to happen, but this is what would have happened if we continued the previous way going forward. It would have just been to default on the paying of the interest. Now that would crash the U.S. economy, and it would be catastrophic in a way that would have no easy recovery. People would never trust the United States again. U.S. bonds would go down to junk bonds. We would never be able to borrow anything again. It would be the end of everything. So to just not pay the interest and to default on it, that's where we were heading. That's the worst possible option. Okay. So the only other way, the second way, and this is where I think we are heading, is to refinance the entire U.S. debt, that's all $37 trillion worth, with 0% interest bonds. Now, this can be happening. This can happen. That would eliminate the entire interest payments all at once. That means you take the entire bond market that we have, all the American bonds, and just swap them out for 0% interest bonds. Okay? Now it's very complicated to do that. It's not easy, but it can be done under certain conditions. Now that can only happen if the Federal Reserve lowers the interest to 0. It has to lower it to 0. Now, as of right now, the Federal Reserve seems to be in no mood to lower the interest rates at all, let alone down to 0. But it did happen in the past in 2 time periods. Now, this is I'm going to read something from Google AI so that you know I'm not just making things up, all right? From December 2008 to December 2015, and again from March 2020 to March 2022. Now, the first period was triggered by the 2008 global financial crisis. And that saw the Fed slash rates to zero in an attempt to stabilize the economy. Again, this is from Google AI. Now, the second period was prompted by the COVID pandemic and also involved the Fed dropping the interest rates to near zero as part of the emergency response. So in two time periods in recent times, for extended periods of time, the Fed did drop interest rates to zero. In both of those cases, the U.S. did not take the opportunity to completely refinance the American debt. But we are in new territory right now. So the only way that the Fed will drop the interest rates to zero, it will only do this if there is a serious economic crash. Now, basically, the U.S. economy must crash if those interest rates are going to go to zero. They will not go to zero unless the economy crashes. And that's the only way the U.S. debt can be refinanced. So one way or another, the economy has to crash. Okay, now, if it continues as it is currently going, if the economy goes the way it's currently going, with the interest rates rising catastrophically, it will default on the interest payments and it will crash. That's not a good way forward. But if the economy crashed before the U.S. has to default on paying the interest, if it crashes for another reason, then the debt can be refinanced. And if it's refinanced with 0% bonds, eliminating the interest payment completely, then you have a deficit that's literally cut in half, and we come within manageable ranges to possibly start balancing the budget. So, I'm going to read something from Google AI again. Can the United States do it? Can it refinance the debt? So, this is from Google AI. Yes, the United States could theoretically refinance the entire debt if interest rates were zero. But it's a complex issue with potential implications. Refinancing would involve the Treasury issuing new debt at a zero interest rate, using those proceeds to buy back the existing debt held by investors. Now, this would effectively lower the government's borrowing costs, potentially saving taxpayers billions of dollars over time. Okay, now we have to ask, well, then they'll just, buy those things back and then resell them as 0% interest bonds. Okay. But, somebody's got to buy those 0% interest bonds. You can't just you can't just say, okay, people, you were getting certain percentage interest before. Okay, now we're going to give you a 0% interest. Be happy. That's not going to happen. So the only way that the new investors would be willing to purchase 0% interest bonds from the United States would be if there were no other good and safe places to put their money. Does everybody hear what I just said? It has to be a place of last resort. That means this would be a strategy of last resort, creating basically a safe house for many while they wait for better times. This would be a safe house. That means this would require a complete collapse of the world economy. So people out there in the world are not going to throw their money into 0% interest bonds while the U.S. refinances its debt if there's any other place to put their money that's better. So the entire world economy would have to crash at the same time in order for people to want to say, oh, I've got to have 0% interest U.S. Treasury bonds. And this is where the current strategy of using tariffs to essentially reduce or eliminate most trade with China and some other nations comes in. So you've been seeing a lot in the news about how the tariff thing seems to be nuts. But you have to look at the larger picture. Don't try to characterize the tariff thing in terms of whether you like Donald Trump or whether you don't like Donald Trump. Think in terms of what could the administration be trying to accomplish. Donald Trump is not trying to just stir everybody up and get everybody upset. You have to say, put the bluster aside. What's going on? Why are they doing this? They're not idiots. They've got some very capable people in the administration. So you have to ask, why are they doing this? So many people get upset with the way Donald Trump talks, but put that aside and say, these are smart people in there. Why are they doing this apparently crazy thing of raising tariffs, cutting off trade, and doing things, abrupt change? Why would they be doing that? If they're smart people, what would be the reasoning behind that? You can't just say they're nuts and they're doing crazy things. You have to say, why are they doing that? So even if you disagree with why they're doing that, you have to follow the logic and say, at least I see why they're doing that, even though you may disagree with doing that. And the one thing that's really catching a lot of people is a lot of people saying, if they do stuff like that, it's going to crash the economy. Do you think they're stupid? I think what's really going on is they know that it is going to crash the economy. That's the whole point. Because there's no way forward for the United States unless the economy crashes, because there's no other way to refinance the entire debt and eliminate the interest payment. It's the only possible way. See, the economy has to crash, and it cannot be just the U.S. economy that crashes. It has to be the entire world economy, because if the world economy crashes, then the investors that are worldwide will have no other place to put their money in except for U.S. Treasury bonds, which are only offering 0% interest. So, the U.S. cannot keep importing money, and it can't be importing more than it's exporting. Right now, it's been going on for decades and decades and decades. It just imports more than it exports. And it simply cannot do that, because every time you do that, you're taking money in the country and shipping it out, and you're just making the country poorer. So that just can't keep going forever unless people want to be broke. I mean, unless you want to just get rid of it. I mean, of course, there will be billionaires out there that are surviving, and people in the media, and people in, pop stars that are doing okay. But and generally speaking, the country is going to be going down. And you can sort of say, well, I haven't been really feeling it. Well, you've not been really feeling it because there's $37 trillion of debt. You've not been feeling it because we haven't been paying all of that. We've been just putting it on a credit card. But if you actually had to pay that debt, the entire country would look way different than it looks right now. Anyone can live high on the hog by putting things on a credit card, but eventually the credit card comes due. And when that does happen, then everybody's going to have a standard of living that's way worse. So you just can't keep exporting less. Exporting less than you're importing. That's right. So you can't just say, I'm going to import lots and not export very much and be okay, and just ring up the difference with a national debt. So this process has been going on for a great many years, and the U.S. economy is suffering as a result, even though I admit that you don't feel it, because you don't feel it because of the $37 trillion of debt. If that debt wasn't there, believe me, you would have felt it really big time. Now, it takes the wealth out of the United States for the U.S. to be importing more than it's exporting. And it shifts the wealth from the United States to these other countries. And again, this is borrowed wealth, because it's going into the $37 trillion of debt. Now, let's talk politics now, and let's talk about Donald Trump. The best way to predict future behavior is to look at past behavior. Okay? So let's look at what Donald Trump has done in the past. President Donald Trump has a great deal of experience with bankruptcies. Listen, just hear me out, everybody, okay? Don't say, okay, that tells you he's a disaster, he just bankrupts companies. No. He has a great deal of experience with strategic bankruptcies, and every single time he comes out better. So let's go through them. Bankruptcy number 1. That happened in 1991. These are Donald Trump's bankruptcies. There's 4 of them to tell you how much experience he has with this. Bankruptcy number 1 was the Trump Taj Mahal. That place was in 1991. That went bankrupt. These are hotels and things like that. Bankruptcy number 2, the Trump Plaza Hotel, and that was in 1992. Bankruptcy number 3, Trump Hotels and Casino Resorts. That was in 2004. And bankruptcy number 4 is the Trump Entertainment Resorts, formerly known as the Trump Hotels and Casino Resorts, and that was in 2009. So that's 4 bankruptcies. He's had a lot of experience. And you can't just say he went bankrupt and went out of business. No, he's still a billionaire. He went bankrupt, restructured, resurfaced, and came back stronger every single time. He knows how to do that thing. So if you want to predict future behavior, look at past behavior. And he has a past of using bankruptcies to wipe out debt and then to restructure and come back stronger. So I'm not saying that's a good strategy or a bad strategy. I'm just saying that is a past strategy that he has employed 4 different times, and it's worked well for him. So he knows that strategy. So if we're to look at the situation in the United States, it's very similar to what was happening with some of his properties where he declared bankruptcy. The United States has uncontrollable debt. It had uncontrollable interest rates. It's essentially going out of business from an economic point of view. And so what do you do in a situation? You crash it. That's what he's done 4 different times. And then once you crash it, you refinance, you restructure, and you come out stronger. I think that's what's going on. Now, he obviously can't say that, and his economic advisors can't say that. But take Elon Musk, for example. He's not stupid. Everyone knows he's a brilliant guy. But he's really deeply involved in this DOGE thing of cutting waste out of the U.S. government. And whether you think those are good cuts or bad cuts, you have to understand that the spending that's being cut is being spent on borrowed money. So it's one thing to say these are good programs that are being cut, but it's another thing to say is to say, well, yeah, but this is generational enslavement, because have we asked our young people who will have to pay that debt if they want to have those programs in place? The programs may be programs that you like and think are valuable, but would you be willing to put those on a credit card so that you have to pay for those in the future? That's really the question. And so Elon Musk, if he cuts away $300 billion of stuff, you can say, well, how is a smart person doing something like that when the deficit is $2 trillion a year? So it's obvious that they're thinking long term, and cutting $200 or $300 billion is not going to solve anything. So it's obvious that someone as smart as Elon Musk knows that. And so the cutting of $300 billion makes sense only if the entire interest rate gets wiped out and the total yearly deficit gets dropped down to less than $1 trillion. Then that $300 billion of savings can actually be a big difference, and then you find other ways to do something else, and other different revenue interests and things like that. That's where also the tariffs come into play, because they might be able to raise the extra income that's required to pay off the rest of the deficit. So if you have DOGE cutting something and then the tariffs bringing in some extra income so that there's an additional $700 billion coming in. It's not like enormous, but it's enough to pay off the deficit, so you get a balanced budget. And then you also have the elimination of the entire interest payment, and then over a period of 10 or 15 years, the debt is gone. Now, we have been in this situation in the past. In the Clinton administration, at the end of the Clinton administration, we had a situation where the budget was balanced. The Federal Reserve chairman at that time was Alan Greenspan, and he was giving advice to Bill Clinton on balancing the budget and so on like that, and Bill Clinton was taking it. Now, Alan Greenspan completely reversed things when George W. Bush, the Republicans, took power in the White House and said, go ahead, cut taxes. basically what happened was the Clinton administration ended their term with a balanced budget, with a surplus, and then the Republican side of the Senate and the House said, we cannot keep this the way it is because the Democrats will spend that money now and produce a whole bunch of new programs, and then the population will like those programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, things like that, and they're not going to want to give up on those things, and that will be something. That's what happened in the Great Depression when Herbert Hoover was in power, and then Roosevelt took over. And the issue was that the Republicans at that time lost their shirt for 50 years because they couldn't win an election for 50 years because Franklin Delano Roosevelt brought in all of these new programs that the American public really liked. That was where FDIC came from. That was where all of these social programs, the social net, all came out of that period. And then the Republicans were not able to win back the House of Representatives for like basically 50 years. It was a very difficult time for the Republicans, and the Republicans in the early 2000s didn't want to go through that again with a balanced budget, surplus new governmental programs that would attract a lot of adherents, followers from people from the Democratic side who would have produced these new programs. And then the Republicans would have been in an electoral dilemma for a long period of time. 2 Republican senators actually mentioned that directly. They actually explained that's what would happen. And one of them is almost a quote to say, "If we let this surplus go on, we won't dominate. We won't control the House of Representatives or the Senate for another 50 years." So that's a real concern. So this is relevant to us now because if this strategy that I'm explaining actually works, and we have a balanced budget again, the interest rate is gone, and it looks like in 10 years' time you're going to have no debt at all, then the real question is people are going to want to start spending money. And then you're going to get into a political situation that's very similar to what happened in the early 2000s, and that whole debate is going to go over. So I do not know if this process of essentially bankrupting the country, refinancing the debt with 0% interest bonds, and then cutting the interest rate out completely so that there's no interest payment per year, and then balancing the budget that way. I don't know if that's actually a workable solution. And I'm not demonizing either side. I'm not demonizing the Republican side or the Democratic side. The Republican side and the Democratic side are totally different than they were in the early 2000s. And they're totally different from the way they were in the 1930s. Those are not the same people. They were not the same policies. They don't have the same belief systems. Everything's different. So it's unclear what would actually happen. I'm just saying that when it comes actually time to do this process, if it actually succeeds, it may not be possible for it to succeed, because if it does succeed in the short run, if the interest payment is eliminated, the U.S. debt is refinanced with 0% bonds. If it succeeds in the short run, immediately after that, people are going to start asking, do we want this? So under the George W. Bush administration, the real push was to cut taxes as fast as possible. And then 9/11 happened. They had all this spending going on. They had 2 wars, Afghanistan and Iraq, and no increase in taxes whatsoever. So it was all financed on borrowed money. And that was actually that was actually a desired result, because then they could starve the government, so it didn't have any money, so no new extra social programs could come out. And that same type of question is going to be asked. Now, I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that question from a political perspective is going to reappear. So let us say that this strategy that I'm thinking might be what Donald Trump and his administration is trying to do. Let us say it exceeded. Let us say it succeeds in the short run. The deficit is cut in half or basically eliminated. The interest rate goes away. The debt looks like it's going to be paid off in 10 years. As soon as that happens, you don't have to pay off the entire 37. trillion. As soon as the balanced budget appears, it's going to be then saying, hey, look, we've got a balanced budget. We can start spending. Then the political struggles are going to continue. And then the real question is one side going to say, we have to starve the beast so that no more extra spending occurs. So we have to get the country back in debt. And that will be after Donald Trump leaves office. So the real question is, if Donald Trump succeeds with this plan, if this is, in fact, what's being planned, can it survive a post-Donald Trump era? And if it cannot, does that mean we're just going to go right back into the cycle of packing up more debt? So it's a real question. So I don't know the answer to that. What I'm only trying to talk about is the short-term prediction of what's going to be happening over the next 2 years. So if there is a crash in the world economy, the two strategies must coincide with both the collapse of the U.S. economy and the bankruptcy of that and the world economy at the same time. Now, the political and the economic have to be considered. If this is going to happen, it must happen before the 2026 midterm elections in the United States, because we have what's happens with on-year, off-year elections in the United States. During on-year, so that's when the presidential election happens at the same time as congressional elections. The president's party sweeps into power a lot of people on that person's party. So Donald Trump swept in a lot of Republicans in the House and the Senate and things like that. Now, a lot of the voters that went to the voting booth simply don't show up 2 years later when they have only midterm elections. Those are called off-year elections. And so whoever wins the White House in the on-year election, that party loses more of the people who simply don't show up in the off-year elections. So what happens is that the Republicans may very well lose majority in the House and the Senate after 2026 or during the 2026 elections. So if the strategy that Donald Trump may have, if I'm correct in reading this, it's got to be done before the midterm election. So it's got to be done in 2025 and 2026. And there has to be enough time in that period to refinance the debt, which is complicated. So you're talking sooner rather than later. Secondly, the world economy must be disrupted all at once as well. It can't just be the U.S. economy. If it was just the U.S. economy, then everyone would take their money out of the U.S. and throw it other places. And that would leave the U.S. in bankruptcy and everybody else doing well. So the world economy has to crash at the same time. Now, this seems to be happening from both the tariff policies as well as the trash talk that about other countries is coming out of the United States. So the tariff policies simply are going to be aimed at, eliminating the export-import imbalance in the United States. And so that's going to simply mean dramatic reductions in trade with China and many other countries. So additional disruptions can be obtained also with military interventions worldwide, such as an military attempt to take over Greenland or the Panama Canal. Now, this thing about taking over Greenland may seem like a crazy, nutty thing, but everyone just sort of says, Donald Trump must be crazy to think he can just take over Greenland. But listen, folks, there's only 50,000 people on Greenland, number one. There's been no serious development of Greenland forever. And secondly, China has just recently stopped exporting all of the major mineral wealth that is used for like semiconductors and all types of things to the United States. Like 80% of the really sensitive minerals type of stuff that we use for basically building everything comes out of China. The sensitive materials that are used for computers and stuff like that, the raw stuff that comes out of the earth. So, and China has just started a policy of saying, well, if you're going to do this tariff thing, you're not getting any of our minerals. So China has, it's not a monopoly, but it's a very serious amount, like 80% of the world's use of those particular minerals coming out of China. So Donald Trump's in a real situation of saying, if you do this tariff war with China and they cut off the supply of those rare earths, you got to replace those rare earths with something. I think that's sort of what's going on with the talk about making Canada the 51st state, which I think is going to be an impossible thing to do. But nonetheless, I think that's what he's thinking, because northern Canada has probably a lot of wealth, mineral wealth like that. But Greenland seems to be an easier option. And when you're dealing with the removal of one source of mineral wealth that's absolutely needed for the high-tech industry to survive in the United States, you've got to replace it with something. And Greenland apparently has some of those resources that are going to be gone from China. So it may be that that's why he's talking about Greenland. The mineral resources have to be outsourced from someplace. If they're not coming from China, they got to get them from somewhere else. Also, the talk about retaking the Panama Canal, that's also just disruptive. If it were to be taken, if it actually were to happen, a lot of countries would disagree, and throwing this sort of chaos in the mix, taking Greenland, maybe the Panama Canal, trash talking a bunch of countries that used to be our allies, stopping a flow of trade from a lot of countries, and especially China, that's going to be seriously disrupting the worldwide economy. And you have to ask, is this a long-term strategy? No, it's happening too quickly. Donald Trump has started this like suddenly. And the issue is, well, why would he be doing something that's not a long-term gradual policy? Why would he be doing something so radical, so dramatic? And the common response is simply, he must be nuts. But that's not a good idea to think just to disregard that. You have to say, what must be going on behind the scenes? So my thought is that this is actually a planned strategy, and it's a strategy that cannot be spoken out loud because of the feedback, because of the backlash that would be occurring. I think they're actually trying to crash the economy, the world economy, as well as the U.S. economy. Remember, the U.S. economy is going to crash no matter what, so this just simply speeds it up. And it would be the worst possible case if the U.S. economy crashed and the world economy did not crash. Then everybody would take the money out of the U.S., put it elsewhere, and the U.S. economy would completely be destroyed. So the world economy must come down at the same time that the U.S. economy crashes, so that when we refinance our debt, world investors say, hey, those 0% interest bonds seem like a good deal to me. It's a place I can save my money, store it, so that its value doesn't go down while we wait for better times. That's what I'm thinking is actually going on. And then there's serious and potentially likely escalating conflicts in Europe and the Middle East. Now, the issue of Taiwan is a wild card, so I don't really know what's going to happen with that, but it's possible that mainland China may take the opportunity to try to seize Taiwan militarily. I don't think they're ready for that now, but they may try to do that if the rest of the world sort of comes unglued. So Trump's recent request for a very significant increase in defense spending, in military spending, suggests that the eye on possible military confrontations is very real. I think he's actually thinking, and I think his advisors are actually thinking, that military spending needs to go up because this type of stuff is going to happen. It does look like confrontations between Israel and Iran and dragging in the United States. It seems like that's pretty much inevitable. It's going to happen. It may not happen, but it looks inevitable at this point. Basically, the nuclear facilities in Iran, from Israel's perspective, they simply have to be destroyed. And the reason is Israel is a one-bomb country. One nuclear weapon on Tel Aviv and the country's gone. So Israel knows that, and so they can't tolerate a nuclear-armed Iran. Iran knows that it's vulnerable if it doesn't have nuclear weapons. And so, it's not going to give up its nuclear program. And it has a lot of enriched uranium already, that is close to weapons grade. So they could ramp that up and get weapons grade uranium relatively quickly, certainly within a year, maybe within weeks. They only need one bomb. So that is a real possibility. And Iran is still financing other hostile forces that are opposed to Israel. So Israel may see no alternative than to simply attack those nuclear facilities in Iran, basically to set it back so that it can't continue doing what it's doing. And the United States may actually follow along with that. Now, I'm not saying it's inevitable. It just seems that the military and political cards seem to be pointing in that direction. So that would disrupt the worldwide economy tremendously, okay? And then you have the issue going on, and I'm not siding with any side here. So those people who think I'm thinking one thing, siding with the one side or siding with the other, you're not. You're not thinking correctly. I'm just trying to look at world strategies of who I think is going to be doing what. And then you have to look at what's going on in Ukraine. It seems clear from my perspective that Russia is in no mean, Vladimir Putin is in no he's in no mind to actually have a currently just plain peaceful settlement in Ukraine. And Ukraine's not interested in simply giving up all of those territories, including Crimea. So it looks like the military confrontation is simply going to continue. In addition, the U.S. and Ukraine have signed an agreement for rare earths to be mined in Ukraine. Now that tells you, again, this thing about China. The United States, Donald Trump and his people, they know they have to replace those rare earths. So that's why they're talking about this agreement with Ukraine being so important. If you want the U.S. to finance the war in Ukraine, they want something from it. And they say, well, we need those rare earths. Again, they need the rare earths because China is no longer selling those rare earths to the United States. The United States must replace those supplies or the U.S. is finished. Those rare earths are absolutely necessary. So the agreement apparently is in place, and those rare earths are there. Some of those rare earths are in the occupied territories in Ukraine that Russia controls. So it is very likely that the U.S. is going to continue to support the war in Ukraine, even if they want a solution, even if Donald Trump wants the war to end. As long as Vladimir Putin is willing to keep on fighting, Donald Trump really has no alternative. They need those rare earths, and they have an agreement to get the rare earths, the minerals. So it's very likely that that's going to happen. Because of that, Western Europe, Germany, Poland, France, Britain, they're probably going to start increasing their support militarily to Ukraine, possibly even sending troops into Ukraine to help fight, because Ukraine's simply running out of soldiers. Now, Russia is also running out of soldiers. They're actively recruiting. They're not recruiting. They're they're drafting and getting people who are teenagers to fight now. They're running out of people as well. But they're also getting soldiers from North Korea and possibly from some other places. So Russia can keep this thing going longer than Ukraine. So Ukraine is going to need a new supply of soldiers. And once that happens, there's probably going to be kickback from Russia, so they're probably going to be militarily engaging in some of the bases that are supplying the sort of the NATO forces in Ukraine. So if Britain, France, Germany, Poland, for example, start sending troops into Ukraine, they're going to have supply places. They're not going to send those people in without any support. And then it's likely that Russia is going to hit those areas of support inside Western Europe. So it's very likely, in my perspective, for the war in Ukraine to expand westward and to go into Western Europe. I don't know how long it will be, but there'll probably be something, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were missile confrontations at least in Western Europe to sort of scare off Western Europe from continuing to support. I think the Russian strategy will be, if a few missiles can scare off Western Europe, so that they don't want the war to expand into Western Europe, that might be enough to pull the Western European troops out of Ukraine. We're going to have to wait to see how that turns out. I don't know, but that's there. So I sort of see that the in a sort of an overall thing, that a worldwide economic and military disruption seems inevitable. Now you see, if just the tariffs were involved, then the world could perhaps try to readjust and sort of deal with the tariffs by just rearranging how they're doing trade. But if there's tariffs plus military disruptions, the world may not see any way to readjust. And so then if the U.S. economy crashes and the world economy crashes at the same time, and the world can't readjust, then U.S. Treasury bonds at 0% interest, really, they look very attractive at that point. And then the entire debt, U.S. debt, can be refinanced. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about remote viewing. Again, I'm not asking you to accept what I'm saying. I'm just giving you the reasons for the way I'm looking at things so that you can decide for yourself. You can Google things, use Grok, to sort of use ChatGPT to sort of get, basic information and whether, these types of things make sense. But you have to come up with your own perspectives and your own thoughts about this. But let me say now something from the remote viewing perspective. From the remote viewing perspective, Farsight, we have had a whole bunch of projects, and we have seen very serious armed conflicts escalating worldwide for a long time. And we have seen the war in Ukraine expanding into Western Europe, possibly as a result of NATO assistance to the Ukraine war. And we have also seen serious conflict occurring within the continental United States, something that it's not currently visible, but we have seen that happening at some point. Let me tell you what we have not been good at. We have not been very good at pinpointing timings for things. And that's because remote viewing focuses on events. It focuses on things that actually happen. Numbers are abstract. Dates are abstract. And remote viewing goes through time and space like cutting through butter with a hot knife. And so time, and a lot of people in the audience often say, well, you didn't get this right with regard to a specific time. You just don't understand that the only thing you can do to remote view time is to look at events and then to make a guesstimate for when do you think that might happen. So you're looking at an event happening, but then you're making a guess on when that event will happen. And to get that guess, you have to judge what the political and military and the economic situation is at a current point in time. And you say, to get that event that we see in remote viewing to happen, how much time do you think it would take? So the timing is something we've not been very good at, and that's very common for remote viewing of all types, getting timing actually correct. There are different ways that this can be addressed, but it takes a lot of resources, and we're working on it. But the timelines themselves, where we see these disruptions happening, they have reappeared in multiple projects. So we have to assume that this type of stuff is going to happen. We just don't know exactly when it's going to happen. But that's why I went through this entire talk that I went through just now, to give you an idea of timing. Because everything from my perspective has to be done before 2026 is over. So you're talking a year and a half that this has to happen, because the midterm elections are coming in November 2026. So this all has to wrap up really quickly. So that's a way for us to look at timing. We see the events and then we look at politics and we say, well, Donald Trump's not going to have an easy time to do this after 2026, because then you're talking about 2027 and 28, and that's the approaching of the next presidential election. Parties are going to be positioning themselves. They're going to be getting ready for the next presidential election. They're going to say Donald Trump's not going to be there, so everything's going to be held. Everything's going to be in limbo. So it's really got to happen before the end of 2026, if it's going to happen at all this way. And if it doesn't happen, then the U.S. economy is going to crash the old way, which is simply it'll have to start defaulting on its interest payments because they just can't keep paying $1 trillion a year in interest, growing exponentially. $37 trillion and a new trillion, and what will it be? $1.5 trillion per year at the end of next year? I mean, it's just growing and growing. Now, let me tell you what we are doing at Farsight. At Farsight, to address these issues, we're adding a very significant new layer of analysis. Basically, it's AI analysis. We want to be able to have analysis of everything that we've done being done objectively. So it's not like me thinking it and putting it together. We want some type of an objective way to look at everything we've ever perceived without any type of bias in terms of my opinions or anything else, just in terms of the data, because we have all of our data is collected totally blind. And if you have AI analysis of all of our data for all of our projects, you get a really good indication of what we've actually seen, and without any type of spin that you might say is coming out of me or somebody else. So we have been making that huge investment, and actually we've held off publishing a few of our projects. We have a bunch of projects that are already completely done in the can, so to speak, in the sense of the video recordings are done and everything. We haven't released yet, and the reason is because we don't want to release them without this extra layer of AI analysis. So that's being done now. It was a huge effort to get it all done. The first thing we needed was written transcripts of every single word of every. And we have over 100. We have like 150 major projects at Farsight, and we needed written transcripts of every single word for everything that was ever done, and then to take out just the words of the remote viewers and analyze those things. So just getting those was enormous, and that's done. And now it's in a situation of getting the AI ready to be able to analyze all of that, and that's being done. So we're very close to being able to start to release all of our stuff, but you're going to see it with a new level of analysis where we can actually give much more firm basis for describing the impact of our remote viewing results in terms of real terms for what it means for the future. And so this is brand new, and in May, which is already May, you're going to start seeing that roll out. So those of you who have been following us on FARSIGHTPrime.com, that's our streaming service, that's where you're going to be seeing all of this. You're going to be seeing it. So that, and understand that we have a total investment just with FARSIGHTPrime.com. That's where we put everything, and all of our subscribers on FARSIGHTPrime.com, they're funding all of this because we have no other sources of income for doing the stuff that we're doing. And also remember, I take no income at all from Farsight, so everything that I do is totally voluntary. The other remote viewers have to be paid, of course, but I get nothing from that on a financial basis. So everything that happens, all the money that comes in from FARSIGHTPrime.com gets directly invested in making this content. And where else on the entire world do you get over 150 projects, major projects, with blind remote viewing under totally scientifically defensible, totally blind conditions? Where can you get that? Anywhere. So what's been lacking now is an independent, objective analysis of the words that were actually captured under blind conditions. That's new, and that's going to be coming out, and we're starting that in May. It's going to be ongoing. We're going to capture a lot of our projects that are in the can that haven't been released yet. We're going to have that incorporated into that, and then we're going back through all of our projects and releasing that as well. So Farsight is going to be the place to get objective information about what's been happening for thousands of years based on our remote viewing data. And it's no longer like, wow, that was impressive, a very interesting remote viewing session, it must be true. No, now you have AI objective analysis of all the words conducted in projects that were done with total blind procedures. And remember, we use what we call instrument blinding protocols, which we consider superior to blind or double blind. Which is described on our website, on farsight.org. What that actually is. But it basically means that the remote viewers work solo. And solo, we believe, is better than blind or double blind. Okay, again, that will start rolling out this month in May. And it'll be, with this new level of analysis, it'll be that going forward. So it's a huge grade in a huge upgrade. It's a huge upgrade in absolutely anything that anyone has ever done relating to remote viewing. Doesn't matter who you are. It's a huge upgrade, and it couldn't be done by anyone else either, because no one has this huge collection of projects that has this tremendous breadth as well as depth in the quality and the focus of the targets of the projects. So this could only have been done by Farsight. Anyway, that's what I wanted to tell you today, and I really hope you had an idea of what I've talked about and understand it. I'm not trying to convince you that the U.S. economy is going to crash. I'm not trying to be like a person that's sort of, screaming the sky is falling or anything like that. I'm just going through the facts as I see them and then telling you this is what I see, and now you have the ability to sort of look at those facts and decide for yourself. But one thing I would like to say, it's my opinion, but I think it's absolutely true. What you're getting in the mainstream news is either tremendously just stupid because the reporters out there are just not very intelligent, or maybe I should, or maybe both. It's just simply biased because the corporate interests and the government interests that control it simply don't want you to know the truth out there. That's what the whole disclosure movement is all about. The disclosure movement that you see with people trying to talk about whether a particular video or photograph, or whether there's other videos and photographs being held back by the Pentagon, indicate that there might be non-human intelligence. That's all disclosure garbage that's just used to delay the obvious. They obviously know that the extraterrestrials have been here for a long time, and that the ships are real. And the real question is, what have the extraterrestrials been doing all this time? And that's, the whole disclosure movement process is not really designed to give you disclosure. It's designed to delay disclosure, to get you treading wheels, treading water, and not going anyplace. So that's what's going on here. And so when I look at these projects that we're doing here at Farsight, and I look at the political and military and economic analysis that I just went through, it's an attempt to give you an objective look at what the facts are out there, and then to help draw conclusions from the facts. And these are things that the mainstream media are simply not going to say. They're just not going to tell you. Nobody in the mainstream news is going to say, look, the U.S. is headed for an economic collapse and this is why. They're not going to say that. And nobody's going to say Donald Trump is really smart that he's trying to crash the economy. No one's going to say that. They're going to do the opposite. They're going to trash talk Donald Trump, and they're going to trash talk Elon Musk, and they're going to trash talk the tariffs, and they're going to trash talk everything because they say they want things to be smooth and calm. But things are not going to be smooth and calm. It's impossible with $37 trillion of debt and interest payments of over $1 trillion a year. It's just not going to be possible. So the real question is, when those people who sort of criticize what's going on, and I'm not saying you should support Donald Trump or oppose Donald Trump, I'm not saying anything like that, but those people who are being critical, you have to say, well, what are the alternatives that they are talking about? And what you will see is that they have no alternatives. So for all those media sources that are trash talking whatever the administration is doing, you have to say, okay, what would you do? And none of them are saying what they would do. Look, if you look at the news, do you see anybody saying the administration should not be doing X, Y, Z, they should be doing A, B, C instead? No, that's just not happening. There's no alternative. So the real question is it going to work? I don't know if it's going to work, but I do think major disruption, both on an economic, political, and military level, is probably very, very possible. In fact, in terms of probabilities, I'd say that would be the most likely outcome for the next year and a half. Probabilistically speaking, disruption, chaos, crash of the economy, U.S. as well as worldwide. That seems more likely than any other outcome. And if by chance you could, with a magic wand, just say, no, just not going to happen, then the other alternative, which will be a slower crash, but a crash nonetheless, because of the debt and the interest, well, that will happen as well. Anyway, I don't know how long that would take for that. If you just let the U.S. economy go as it is, and the exports being much less than the imports, and the deficit continuing, and the interest growing, and then the debt growing, I don't know. Maybe you could get to 2030. I'm not sure how long that would take, but eventually it would have to crash because that process just simply cannot be sustained. So this is my best way of thinking what's going on, and the timing. Again, I'm not getting the timing from remote viewing. I'm getting the timing from political analysis, economic analysis, combined, and saying it's got to happen before the 2026 midterm elections. That's what I'm thinking. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, and we do read what you post in the forums on FarsightPrime.com. So I really hope you give us your ideas, and also on YouTube, the comments down below. So I'm going to see you next week, but again, it will not be on Sunday. Something is happening on Sunday. I won't be able to do it on Sunday, but I will send out an email telling you when the next spotlight will be. It'll be either Monday or most likely Tuesday, but it'll be Monday or Tuesday next week that the next spotlight occurs. Normally we have it every Sunday, but next week is going to be different. All right, everybody, it's been really great. Let me just check for the chat to see how everybody's doing. And we have a great turnout. We have a super great turnout. And I'm going to see you next week after Sunday. So I want to, that'll be like Monday or Tuesday. So I want you all to stay well. And again, listen to this presentation that I gave, maybe listen to it twice and collect the facts and Google things and ChatGPT things and Grok things and Gemini things, investigate your own ideas and see if you come up with similar ideas or different ideas and post those things in the comments in the forums on FarsightPrime.com or down below the video on YouTube, and we'll continue this discussion. And in the meantime, we'll be publishing other stuff as fast as we can, but everything we publish from now on is going to have this special AI objective analysis. So May is when that's rolling out. So we're going to be catching up with all of the projects that we have ready to go, but they're going to see that extra layer, which is huge and really important. See you all next week, folks. That'll be Monday or Tuesday next week, and if you haven't signed up for the newsletter, the free newsletter on that you can do it on farsight.org, please do that now, because that's when we send out. That's the newsletter we use to announce when the live streams are going to happen. All right, everybody. See you next week. All right.